What do synth nerds play in heaven? An ARP, of course! So this particular half-assed attempt at a tutorial is going to be looking at ARPs. I'm going to give you my particular take on ARPs and my ARPy background, and then we're going to have a look at some implementations on the Crave and the Circuit Tracks. My love of a good ARP goes back a long way. My mum tells this story of a time when I was around 2 or 3 years old. I was at my grandparents' house and I went missing. Nobody knew where I was. They were searching high and low and absolutely distraught with where I had gone. Eventually, I was found. Well, I wouldn't be here if I hadn't been. I was found outside of the local church that was 5 minutes down the road. And this is an old English style church with a huge tower. And in that tower there were some bells. And I was outside staring up, rapt attention, absolutely blissed out. And all I could say was dong, 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 dong. Yeah, just like Quasimodo, I was taken by the bells, the bells. And what were the bells playing? The bells were playing a broken chord, and that's exactly what an ARP is. A broken chord is simply the notes from a chord played one after the other. It's also known as an arpeggio, but we'll get back to that later. Let's start by having a look at the Crave. It's nice and simple, and we can use the LFO to create a bass line that bounces along between two notes quite nicely. When we look at ARPs on the tracks, it's the LFO that we'll be looking at there as well. All we do is route the square wave LFO to the pitch and then tune that pitch until we are bouncing between an octave or maybe a fifth. You can use any two notes you like, but the octave and the fifth are quite good because musically they leave things open for other notes to form a scale and tell you what key you're working in. Once we've got this simple two-note line going, we can add complexity to it by changing the notes that are played. We can even program this up as a sequence. And the root notes on that two-note LFO will follow the sequence that we're playing. The ability to create more complex patterns by layering complexity is one of the joys of ARPs. They're not the same as the repeated sequences that you will program into a sequencer, because you can change the notes of the chord or the root note, and then that will change the sequence as a whole, thereby changing the melody and giving you that added complexity. As a young rock kid in the 80s, I think this is one of the things that I found really difficult with synth bands. In my eyes then, real musicians didn't cheat by playing complex patterns using one finger on a single key that moved up and down. At this point in my life, I had been inflicted upon the classical world by being given violin lessons. Unsurprisingly, my half-assed approach didn't endear me to my violin teacher, so I didn't last that long. However, before I was finally given the boot, I did learn about arpeggios there. These specific patterns of notes that you played over and over again, up and down, just sounded cool to me then. I didn't realise what I was actually learning. I didn't realise that arpeggios were actually broken chords. I just thought they were part of the general torture of violin practice. Fast forward through a few years of learning the guitar, when I actually learnt what chords were, to my very first attempt at trying to learn the banjo. My Teach Yourself Banjo book split the playing down into two parts. There were finger pecking patterns, which they called rolls, and then there were chord shapes. And that was when it struck me. The rolls, or finger patterns, were essentially just the timing of when the notes were played. And then, of course, the chord shapes dictated what those notes were. Essentially, playing bluegrass banjo was just playing a series of arpeggios. Still, you're not here for me to wax lyrical about my half-arsed banjo playing. I promised you some Crave and I promised you some tracks. Now, we've done the Crave, so let's have a look at the tracks. Arpeggios on the tracks are found in the LFO menu, and you can do some pretty complex and amazing stuff using them. Here we're going to set up two arpeggio lines on a single patch that we can then fade in and out to create something really quite complicated indeed. Once you've found a workable patch, the first thing you need to do is latch it so that it will continue playing while you experiment with the sound and get into some sound design. First job is to press key sync, so every time you press a note, the LFO will sync up and start again. Then if we scroll down the list of LFO types, you can find some musical patterns, like the minor arpeggio. Now if we have a look at the modulation matrix, we can set the LFO amount on LFO1 to the pitch on oscillator 1, and then on the macro we scroll down and set that to mod matrix 1 and turn the depth up full. And you can hear it going crazy. We tweak the depth on the macro so that things don't get out of hand. Next, we find a nice synchronized pace, which gives us a bit of a musical sense. We don't want it to go too fast, we want it to be at a nice rhythmical pace. Now if we go back to modulation again and we set LFO1 to oscillator 1 level, instead of just changing the pitch, we also change the volume slightly. This gives much more the impression of individual notes being played rather than just one constant volume with the pitch changing. And now if we bring in oscillator 2, bring it up an octave, so we've got two very definitely different patterns, and go to LFO2. Then we can scroll back down and you choose another one of those musical LFO steps. And again, make sure it's clicked to key sync, so that every time you press a key, it starts the LFO running again. Now if we go to Mod Matrix 3, we do the same thing. We set LFO 2 to the pitch of oscillator 2 and to the level of oscillator 2. And that is all there is to it. Assign macros 1 and 2 to the volume of oscillator 1 and oscillator 2, and you can fade them in and out. That way, on one patch, you can have two Arps playing against each other. A bit of a more bang for your buck. Having made it this far, make sure you press the like button and turn on the bell so you'll be told whenever I put any more half-assed content out. If you haven't subscribed, then really it's your duty to sub now. And remember, in the words of the Sirius Cybernetics Corporation, share and enjoy. See you later, kids. Bye!